Welcome to a place where the line between dreams and nightmares blurs, where shadows come alive and mysteries linger just beyond the light. I'm your guide through this haunting realm, where every whisper tells a story, and every story pulls you deeper into the unknown. Whether you find yourself here at Nightmare Lullabies or with Miss Nightmare, know that you are never truly alone in the dark.
Our story today is about Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. Richard was one of 5 children born to a former police officer who worked in Juarez, Mexico. Eventually, the family moved to Texas when his father got a job on the Santa Fe Railroad. While his father was hardworking and dedicated to providing for his family, he was also prone to violent outbursts and would often physically abuse his wife and children, creating a toxic and abusive environment for the Ramirez kids. When Richard was just 2 years old, a piece of furniture fell on him, leaving a severe gash on his forehead. Then, at 5, he was hit in the head with a swing at school, which knocked him unconscious. He later claimed these injuries led to a lifetime of seizures. Due to the chaos at home, Richard often sought refuge at his cousin Miguel's house. Miguel was much older and a Vietnam War veteran who had seen and done terrible things while in combat. He would recount his gruesome war stories to young Richard and even showed him photos of his actions, including posing with the severed head of a woman he had raped and killed. This fascinated Richard, who didn't fully understand the horror of these actions. After this traumatic event, Richard moved in with his sister and her husband, Roberto, who turned out to be a peeping Tom. Roberto would take Richard with him at night to spy on women through their windows, further exposing him to deviant behavior. During his teenage years, Richard began associating violence with his sexual fantasies. While working at a Holiday Inn, he used a master key to rob guests' rooms. One night, he attempted to rape a woman staying in one of the rooms, but her husband returned just in time, catching Richard in the act and restraining him until the police arrived. However, the couple, who were from out of state, chose not to testify, and the charges were dropped. Richard lost his job, and shortly after, he dropped out of high school in the 9th grade. For several years, not much is known about Richard's activities. However, by the age of 22, he had moved to California, settling first in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. It was here, on April 10, 1984, that Richard committed his first known murder, assaulting and killing a 9-year-old girl in the basement of his hotel. This crime went unsolved for years until DNA evidence linked him to the murder in 2009. Richard then moved south to Los Angeles. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found brutally murdered in her apartment. She had been stabbed repeatedly, her throat slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Police found a fingerprint at the scene but had no suspects. Richard's crime spree continued. On March 17, 1985, he shot Maria Hernandez in the face as she was entering her garage, but she miraculously survived when the bullet ricocheted off her keys. Richard then entered the house, killing her roommate, Dale Okazaki, and soon after attacked another woman, Veronica Yu, stealing her car. Throughout 1985, Richard continued to terrorize the Los Angeles area. He broke into homes, murdered, raped, and stole from his victims. His crimes became more violent and erratic. On one occasion, he gouged out a victim's eyes and placed them in a jewelry box, which he took with him as a trophy. The police began to connect the dots, realizing a serial killer was at large. On August 8, 1985, Richard broke into the home of Sakina Abawath and her husband Elias. After killing Elias, Richard bound and raped Sakina, demanding she swear on Satan that she would not scream during his assault. Richard had developed a disturbing obsession with Satanism, which he incorporated into his crimes. As the body count rose, police held a press conference, warning the public of the Night Stalker and urging people to secure their homes. This infuriated Richard, who felt challenged. In response, he threw his blood-soaked sneakers off the Golden Gate Bridge, trying to destroy evidence. But his reign of terror would soon come to an end. On August 24, 1985, Richard was spotted outside a home by a 13-year-old boy named James Romero. James took note of Richard's appearance and the car he was driving, and his quick thinking led the police to find the stolen vehicle Richard was using. From there, they were able to lift a fingerprint that identified him as Richard Ramirez. With a name and face to the Night Stalker, police released Richard's mugshot to the public. During another press conference, they addressed him directly, saying, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will too. There will be no place for you to hide." Richard Ramirez's days were numbered. He had terrorized California, leaving a trail of victims and a community gripped in fear. But with the authorities closing in, the end of his brutal spree was in sight. Today we're focusing on the case of Wade Wilson, a man whose name is now synonymous with pure evil in Florida, committed two of the most heinous murders in recent memory. His crime spree shocked the entire community and raised the ultimate question: are killers born or made? Wade Wilson, just 29 years old, now faces the ultimate punishment: death. After a trial that spanned nearly 4 years, a Florida jury has decided that Wilson will pay for his crimes on death row. But how did we get here? How did an ordinary young man become the cold-blooded killer responsible for the deaths of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz in October 2019? Buckle up as we delve into this horrifying case. Let's rewind to October 6, 2019. Wade Wilson was out at a local bar called Buddha, a popular hangout in Cape Coral, Florida. There he met Christine Melton, a 35-year-old woman who was just out to have a good time. They drank, partied, and eventually decided to leave together. What started as a casual night of fun would soon turn deadly. The next morning, Christine was asleep in her own home, safe, or so she thought. But while she lay vulnerable, Wade made a deadly decision. He strangled her in her sleep and stole her car, driving away like nothing had happened. This marked the beginning of a 48-hour killing spree that would leave 2 women dead and a community in shock. Later that same day, Wade crossed paths with 43-year-old Diane Ruiz, a woman on her way to work at the Cape Coral Moose Lodge. She was walking along the street when Wade approached her, asking for directions. He lured her into his car, and within moments, Diane found herself fighting for her life. Wade strangled her too, but when she didn't die right away, he made a split-second decision that would cement his status as a monster. Wade pushed Diane out of the car and ran her over. Not once, not twice, but multiple times, making sure she was dead. And that wasn't the end of his rampage. Just hours later, Wade would attack another woman, his ex-girlfriend, Mila Mons. The two had a violent history, and when Wade tried to force her into his car, it could have easily been a third murder. But Mila fought back, managing to escape and run for her life. She was injured, bloodied, and terrified, but she lived. Thanks to her quick thinking, police were able to respond immediately, beginning their hunt for Wade. As the police began their investigation, Wade was already on the move, trying to flee the area. He even reached out to his father, Stephen Tester, in a series of bizarre phone calls. Wade confessed to killing 2 people, but his father, knowing Wade's history of drug abuse and exaggeration, didn't believe him at first. Stephen thought it was just another one of Wade's delusions, but as the calls went on, the horrifying truth became clear. Wade described the murders to his father in chilling detail. He admitted to strangling Christine in her sleep and running over Diane with her own car. What's worse, he didn't express a shred of remorse. In fact, Wade seemed almost excited, even proud of what he had done. He told his father he wanted to make Diane's body look like spaghetti, a sickening admission that sent chills down Stephen's spine. Wade wasn't just confessing to murder, he was reveling in it. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Stephen finally alerted the police, giving them Wade's location. On October 8, 2019, just 2 days after the murders, Wade Wilson was arrested. He was hiding out in a house he had broken into, trying to avoid capture. But his time on the run was over. Once in custody, Wade's true nature continued to reveal itself. Jailhouse phone calls recorded Wade mocking his father, denying responsibility, and even talking about pleading insanity. In one conversation, he scoffed at his legal situation, saying, "There's 2 things that'll happen. 1, they'll find me not guilty by reason of insanity, or 2, they'll kill me." And as we now know, it's the latter that the jury chose. Throughout the trial, prosecutors painted Wade as a cold, calculating killer. They argued that Wade knew exactly what he was doing, and his actions were premeditated. Defense attorneys, however, tried to present a different narrative, leaning heavily into Wade's troubled past and drug abuse. They claimed that Wade wasn't fully in control of his actions, that he was acting out of trauma, fueled by drugs and mental illness. But the jury wasn't buying it. After hearing from countless witnesses, including Mila Mons, who bravely recounted her terrifying encounter with Wade, the jury deliberated. On all charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder, grand theft, and battery, Wade was found guilty. And when it came to the death penalty, the jury voted 9-3 in favor. On August 27, 2023, Wade Wilson was officially sentenced to death for the murders of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. He will now join nearly 300 other inmates on Florida's death row, a fate reserved for the state's most dangerous criminals. But it's important to note that death row is not an immediate sentence. On average, inmates spend about 20 years awaiting execution in Florida. Some have been there since the 1980s, and it's not uncommon for death row inmates to die of natural causes before the state can carry out the death penalty. Wade Wilson's future, while bleak, will likely include years of isolation and little contact with the outside world. Yet, even behind bars, his story continues to attract attention. Wade's commissary is full, thanks to letters and donations from admirers, some of whom are disturbingly drawn to men like Wade. He may be confined, but he's not alone. What drives someone like Wade Wilson to commit such horrific crimes? Was he born with an innate darkness, or did life's traumas push him to the brink? These are questions we may never fully answer, but they're ones we must continue to ask. Wade's lack of remorse, his cold confession to his father, and his chilling behavior in court suggest a man who fully embraced evil. But like so many killers before him, there's always the question, could it have been stopped? As Wade prepares to spend the rest of his life in a cold, isolated cell, we're left to reflect on the lives of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz, 2 women who never got the chance to escape the nightmare Wade brought into their world. Their families, though somewhat comforted by the verdict, are still grieving the loss of their loved ones. In the end, Wade Wilson got what he deserved. But justice, as we know, rarely feels like enough when it comes to cases like this. Some serial killers hide behind a mask of normalcy. For John Wayne Gacy, that mask was literal. A beloved member of his community, a businessman, and, most disturbingly, a man who entertained children at parties dressed as a clown. But beneath that painted smile lurked one of the most terrifying murderers in American history. We delve into the mind of the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy, who murdered 33 young men and boys in the 1970s. How did he manage to live a double life, fooling everyone around him while carrying out unspeakable horrors? Let's find out. To understand John Wayne Gacy, we have to start with his early life. Born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Gacy grew up in a working-class family, the second of 3 children. He had a difficult relationship with his father, John Stanley Gacy, who was an alcoholic and often took out his frustrations on young John. His father belittled him, calling him dumb and sissy, and even physically abused him. These experiences scarred Gacy deeply, contributing to his lifelong struggle with self-worth and masculinity. Gacy also suffered from health problems, including a heart condition, which limited his physical abilities. His father viewed this as yet another weakness. The emotional and physical abuse, combined with Gacy's feelings of inadequacy, would be factors in the creation of his dark, hidden persona later in life. These unresolved issues would grow, eventually leading him down a path of destruction. Despite his troubled childhood, Gacy attempted to build a respectable life. In 1964, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, where he met and married Marlyn Myers. Through her father, Gacy became the manager of 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises, earning a good living. He appeared to have the perfect suburban life, a wife, 2 children, and a stable job. On the surface, Gacy was a successful, outgoing, and popular man. He was active in local politics, even becoming the vice president of a local JC's chapter, a civic organization that focused on leadership and community service. But behind this outward success, Gacy's dark desires began to surface. In 1968, Gacy was arrested for the first time after sexually assaulting a teenage boy, a charge he denied. Gacy lured the boy with promises of pornography and forced him into performing sexual acts. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sodomy, but served only 18 months. However, this was just the beginning. After his release, he returned to Chicago, remarried, and restarted his business ventures, once again masking his true nature. It was during the 1970s that John Wayne Gacy began to cultivate his sinister alter ego, Pogo the Clown. He joined a local Jolly Joker clown club, performing at children's parties, hospitals, and charity events. It was the perfect disguise. Who would ever suspect a clown? This persona allowed him to blend into the community, gaining trust and access to vulnerable victims. Gacy used his charm and status to lure young men to his home under various pretenses, offering them work, alcohol, or drugs. But once inside, the atmosphere changed. Gacy would often perform what he called his handcuff trick, convincing his victims to allow themselves to be restrained. From there, he would brutalize and murder them, often strangling them with a rope, a method he referred to as his rope trick. His victims were typically young boys and men, ranging from ages 14 to 21, many of whom were runaways or workers who depended on Gacy for employment. Their disappearances went unnoticed for years, largely because they were from marginalized groups. Gacy exploited this, knowing that police wouldn't prioritize their cases. The true horror of Gacy's crimes lies in what he did after murdering his victims. He buried 26 of them in the crawl space beneath his home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, covering their bodies in quicklime to accelerate decomposition. The crawl space became a macabre graveyard filled with bodies packed tightly together, their remains stacked like a house of horrors. Gacy continued his killing spree unchecked for 6 years, burying the majority of his victims in the crawl space, while others were dumped in nearby rivers. His ability to maintain a public life while hiding the horrors beneath his home is one of the most chilling aspects of his story. Gacy's downfall began in December 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Piest went missing after a meeting with Gacy about a potential job. Unlike many of his previous victims, Piest's disappearance drew immediate attention due to his family's persistence and the fact that Piest was a well-liked, middle-class boy. This led police to investigate Gacy further, eventually obtaining a search warrant for his home. When officers entered the crawl space, the overwhelming stench of decaying bodies hit them. What they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators: 29 bodies buried in various stages of decomposition. Gacy confessed to the murders, admitting he had killed 33 young men, though only 29 were found in his house. Gacy's trial in 1980 became one of the most notorious in U.S. history. His defense attorneys attempted to plead insanity, claiming that Gacy had multiple personalities and couldn't be held responsible for his actions. Psychiatrists testified that he exhibited traits of borderline schizophrenia, though others argued he was fully aware of his crimes and relished the power. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a picture of Gacy as a cold, calculating killer who knew exactly what he was doing. His victims were dehumanized, reduced to objects for his sadistic pleasure. The jury took less than 2 hours to find him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to death. So what drove John Wayne Gacy to commit these heinous acts? Experts believe Gacy's early life played a major role in shaping his violent tendencies. His need for power and control stemmed from years of feeling inadequate and powerless. His clown persona, Pogo, was a way to mask his true identity, allowing him to compartmentalize his violent urges while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Psychiatrists who examined Gacy noted his narcissism, lack of empathy, and inability to feel guilt. He showed no remorse for his victims, often referring to them as mere objects. His ability to dissociate from his crimes is what made him so dangerous. He was a master manipulator, able to convince others he was harmless while carrying out unspeakable acts. In 1980, Gacy went to trial for the murder of 33 boys and young men. His defense team attempted to argue that Gacy was insane, that he had multiple personalities and was not in control of his actions. They even claimed that his alter ego, Jack, committed the murders. However, the overwhelming evidence, including Gacy's own admissions, made it clear that this was not the case. Gacy was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. While awaiting execution, Gacy showed no remorse, often painting self-portraits of himself as Pogo the Clown, a final chilling reminder of his ability to compartmentalize his monstrous acts. On May 10, 1994, after 14 years on death row, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. Gacy's ability to present himself as a normal, upstanding citizen while carrying out such heinous crimes has fascinated psychologists for decades. Diagnosed as a psychopath, Gacy showed no empathy for his victims. He saw them as disposable objects, tools for his gratification. His narcissism, need for control, and lack of remorse fit the classic profile of a serial killer. Perhaps what makes Gacy one of the most terrifying killers in history is the ease with which he blended into society. He was a man who could smile and joke with neighbors, even perform as a clown at children's parties, while leading a life of unspeakable horror behind closed doors. It is this duality, the ability to live a double life so effortlessly, that makes John Wayne Gacy's story so chilling.
As the darkness fades and the quiet settles in, you've wandered through another shadowed tale, leaving behind echoes of fear and fragments of mystery. But remember, the night never truly ends here. Whenever you close your eyes, these stories linger, waiting in the stillness, just beyond the edge of sleep. Until next time, when you dare to return to nightmare lullabies, or perhaps find yourself with Miss Nightmare, where your darkest dreams will once again be whispered into the night.